Every empire that ever existed collapsed following the same 9 stages. Rome, Britain, the Soviet Union. All of them. The United States is currently at stage 6. Here's what that means. Stage 7 is currency crisis. Stage 8 is social fracture. Stage 9 is collapse. And nobody in power is talking about this pattern. They're hoping you won't notice. The Roman Empire took 200 years to decline through these stages. The British Empire took 100 years. The Soviet Union took 69 years. Each cycle moves faster than the last. The U.S. entered stage 1 in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. That's 54 years ago. We're accelerating through these stages faster than any empire in recorded history. Stage 6 is called debt spiral and monetary expansion. It's where governments print money to solve problems that money printing created. It's the point of no return. Let me show you something. U.S. national debt is $37 trillion. In 2000, it was $5.6 trillion. That's a 560% increase in 25 years. The debt to GDP ratio just hit 123%. That's higher than it was after World War II. Higher than during the Great Depression. Here's the thing. Every empire that reached this debt level collapsed within one generation. Not one survived. The pattern is identical. Currency debasement, military overextension, political polarization, wealth inequality, asset bubbles, declining trust in institutions. All 9 stages, all happening in sequence, all accelerating. You're watching the late stage decline of the American empire in real time. And your dollars, your savings, your retirement accounts are sitting in the blast radius. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is pattern recognition. Historians call it the imperial life cycle. Economists call it late stage fiat currency collapse. It's happened 27 times in recorded history. Now it's happening here. I'm going to show you exactly what stage we're in. I'm going to show you the specific evidence from the last 18 months. I'm going to show you what comes next. And then I'm going to show you exactly how to position yourself before we hit stage 7. This is happening right now. Let's begin. To understand why stage 6 is the point of no return, start with what the 9 stages actually are. Most people think empires fall suddenly. One day everything's fine, the next day it's chaos. Here's the reality. Empires decline through 9 predictable stages over decades. Each stage creates the conditions for the next. Each stage accelerates the timeline. Here are the 9 stages. Currency debasement. The empire abandons sound money. They disconnect from gold or silver. They start printing. Debt accumulation. Government spending accelerates. They borrow against future growth that never materializes. Military overextension. The empire fights wars it can't afford. Military spending consumes 30-50% of the budget. Wealth inequality explosion. The gap between rich and poor becomes impossible to hide. The middle class shrinks dramatically. Asset bubbles. Money printing inflates stocks, real estate, bonds. Everything goes up except real wages. Debt spiral and monetary expansion. They print money to pay interest on debt. Inflation accelerates. Trust in the currency erodes. Currency crisis. Foreign holders dump the currency. Exchange rates collapse. Import prices explode. Social fracture, political extremism, civil unrest. Complete breakdown of social consensus. Systemic collapse. The currency fails completely. The government loses legitimacy. The empire ends. Now let me show you where the U.S. is today. Stage 1 happened August 15th, 1971. Nixon ended dollar-gold convertibility. The dollar became pure fiat currency, no backing, no limits. Stage 2 accelerated from 1980 to 2000. National debt went from $900 billion to $5.6 trillion, a 522% increase in 20 years. Stage 3 peaked from 2001 to 2021. The war on terror cost $8 trillion. That's $8,000. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya. Wars funded entirely by debt. Stage 4 happened from 2008 to 2020. The top 1% captured 54% of all new wealth created. The bottom 50% captured 3%. The Gini coefficient hit 0.49, the highest since 1928. Stage 5 exploded from 2020 to 2024. The S&P 500 went from 2,200 to 4,800. Housing prices up 47% nationally, but median wages up only 12%. Everything inflated except purchasing power. Stage 6 is happening right now. In 2023, the U.S. government spent $659 billion on interest payments alone. That's more than the entire defense budget, more than Medicare, more than anything except Social Security. By 2030, interest payments will consume $1.4 trillion annually. That's the Congressional Budget Office's projection, not mine. Here's what this means. The government has to borrow money to pay interest on money they already borrowed. It's a debt spiral. It's mathematically unsustainable. When you're in stage 6, you have 2 choices. Default on the debt or inflate it away. Default means economic depression. Banks fail, markets crash, Social Security stops. Inflation means currency devaluation, print dollars to pay debts, destroy savings silently. Every empire chooses inflation, every single one, because inflation is invisible theft. Default is visible collapse. Politicians always choose the invisible option. The US is choosing inflation right now. Let me show you the historical precedent. This has happened before. Let me show you. Rome entered stage 6 in 235 AD under Emperor Maximinus Thrax. The empire was fighting wars on 3 frontiers. Military spending was consuming 75% of tax revenue. The Roman government couldn't raise more taxes. Citizens were already at the breaking point, so they debased the currency instead. The denarius was Rome's silver coin. In 200 AD, it was 90% silver. By 260 AD, it was 5% silver. They diluted the currency by 94% in 60 years. Prices exploded. A measure of wheat cost 8 denarii in 200 AD. By 301 AD, it cost 100,000 denarii. That's a 12,500x increase. Roman citizens who saved denarii in 200 AD lost 99.9% of their purchasing power by 301 AD. Pensions became worthless. Savings evaporated. The middle class disappeared. Rome hit stage 7 in 260 AD. The currency collapsed. Regional commanders stopped accepting denarii. They demanded payment in gold or grain. Stage 8 came in 285 AD. Civil wars. The empire split into 3 competing states, different emperors in different regions. Stage 9 happened in 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor was deposed. Total collapse. 241 years from stage 6 to stage 9. But here's the key. The timeline accelerates with each empire. Britain entered stage 6 in 1914 at the start of World War I. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. Britain financed the war with debt. By 1918, British government debt was 114% of GDP. By 1945, it was 259% of GDP. 2 world wars, all funded by borrowing. Britain printed money to service this debt. The pound lost 98% of its purchasing power from 1914 to 1980. A 66-year currency devaluation. Britain hit stage 7 in 1949 when they devalued the pound by 30% against the dollar. Stage 8 came in the 1970s with labor strikes and political chaos. Stage 9 was the end of British global dominance by 1980. From stage 6 to stage 9, 66 years for Britain, compared to 241 years for Rome. The Soviet Union entered stage 6 in 1980. Military spending reached 15-17% of GDP during the Cold War. The government printed rubles to cover budget deficits. By 1987, Soviet debt was spiraling. They couldn't feed their people or supply consumer goods. Stage 7 hit in 1989 when the ruble collapsed. Stage 8 was political dissolution in 1990. Stage 9 was complete collapse on December 26, 1991. From stage 6 to stage 9, 11 years. The same pattern is repeating. Currency debasement, debt spiral, inflation, collapse. Each cycle moves faster. The US entered stage 6 in 2020. We're 4 years in. If we follow the Soviet timeline, we have 7 years. If we follow Britain's timeline, we have 62 years. But the pattern is accelerating. It's happening again right now. Here's what's happening right now. In January 2020, the Fed's balance sheet was $4.2 trillion. By April 2022, it hit $9 trillion. They printed $4.8 trillion in 26 months. That's a 114% increase in just over 2 years. They called it quantitative easing. That's banker language for printing money. They created $4.8 trillion out of nothing and used it to buy government bonds. Why does this matter? Because someone has to buy the government's debt. When private investors won't buy it, the Fed creates money and buys it themselves. This is the textbook definition of stage 6, the central bank printing money to finance government spending. In fiscal year 2023, the U.S. government paid $659 billion in interest on the national debt. That's up from $345 billion in 2021, a 91% increase in interest payments in just 2 years. This reveals the debt spiral. As debt grows, interest grows. As interest grows, they borrow more to pay the interest. The cycle accelerates. The Congressional Budget Office projects interest payments will hit $1.4 trillion by 2034. That's 25% of all federal revenue, just to pay interest, not to fund programs, not to build infrastructure, just to service debt. Silicon Valley Bank collapsed on March 10th, 2023. Signature Bank collapsed on March 12th. First Republic Bank collapsed on May 1st. 3 major banks failed in 8 weeks. The second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in U.S. history. Why did they fail? Because they owned long-term bonds that lost value when interest rates rose. When depositors panicked, the banks couldn't cover withdrawals. The Fed and FDIC created a $143 billion bailout fund within 72 hours. They guaranteed all deposits, even those over the $250,000 limit. This is not conspiracy, this is policy. They printed money to save the banks. The Consumer Price Index rose 23.8% from January 2020 to December 2024. That's the cumulative inflation rate over 5 years. But here's what they're not telling you. The CPI methodology changed in 1990. They changed how they calculate housing costs, food, and energy. If you use the 1980 methodology, real inflation is closer to 50-60% over these 5 years. Shadow Stats calculates real inflation at 12-14% annually using pre-1990 methods. Your dollar lost half its purchasing power in 5 years, but official numbers say it only lost 24%. In September 2024, foreign holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds dropped to $7.2 trillion. That's down from $7.6 trillion in 2021. Foreign investors are selling U.S. debt. China's holdings dropped from $1.1 trillion in 2021 to $775 billion in 2024, a 30% reduction. Why does this matter? The U.S. government issues $2 trillion in new debt annually. Someone has to buy it. When foreign buyers disappear, domestic institutions must absorb more. When they can't, the Fed steps in and prints money to buy it. This is stage 6. When you can't find buyers for your debt, you print money to buy it yourself. The dollar lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1913 when the Federal Reserve was created. That's 111 years of slow devaluation. But look at the acceleration. From 1913 to 1971, the dollar lost 85% of its value, 58 years. From 1971 to 2024, it lost 87% of its remaining value, 53 years. The rate of devaluation is accelerating. We lost more purchasing power in the last 53 years than in the first 58 years. Total U.S. household net worth hit $154 trillion in 2024. That's up from $89 trillion in 2016, a 73% increase in 8 years. But median household income only rose from $59,000 to $74,000, a 25% increase. What's happening? Asset prices are inflating faster than wages. If you own stocks and real estate, you're getting richer. If you only earn wages, you're falling behind. This is stage 6. Money printing inflates assets, while wages stagnate. The wealth gap explodes. This is not conspiracy. This is policy. These are official government numbers. Federal Reserve data, Congressional Budget Office projections. We're in stage 6 right now. The debt spiral is accelerating. Currency devaluation is accelerating. The gap between assets and wages is widening. Now, let me show you exactly how the mechanism works. Here's exactly how this works. Let's say the U.S. government needs to spend $7 trillion in 2025. They collect $4.5 trillion in tax revenue. That leaves a $2.5 trillion deficit. They need to borrow $2.5 trillion. So the Treasury Department issues bonds. A bond is a loan to the government. You give them $1,000 today. They promise to pay you back $1,050 in 1 year. That's a 5% interest rate. Now, who buys these bonds? 4 groups: foreign governments, domestic banks, investment funds, and the Federal Reserve. When foreign governments and banks buy enough bonds, everything works. The government gets their $2.5 trillion. Bond buyers get their interest. The system continues. But here's what happens in stage 6. Foreign buyers start saying no. They're worried about inflation eroding the value of their bonds. They're worried the U.S. won't be able to pay them back, so the Fed steps in. They create new money digitally and use it to buy government bonds. This is called monetizing the debt. Let's say the Fed buys $1 trillion of the $2.5 trillion in new bonds. They just created $1 trillion from nothing. This new money enters the economy. The government spends it on programs, salaries, contracts. That's $1 trillion of new purchasing power competing for the same amount of goods and services. When money supply increases faster than goods and services, prices rise. That's inflation. Now here's the cascade effect. When inflation rises, interest rates rise. When interest rates rise, the government's interest payments increase. Remember, they're paying interest on $37 trillion of existing debt. If rates go from 3% to 5%, their annual interest payment goes from $1.1 trillion to $1.85 trillion. That's $750 billion more per year. Now the deficit is even bigger. They need to borrow even more. The Fed has to print even more money. Inflation accelerates further. This is the debt spiral. Each step makes the next step worse. Each year requires more printing than the last year. When does it end? When foreign holders dump U.S. bonds completely. When domestic buyers refuse to buy, when the Fed is the only buyer left. At that point, you hit stage 7, currency crisis. The dollar's exchange rate collapses. Import prices explode. Gas goes from $4 per gallon to $12 per gallon. Then stage 8, social fracture. People can't afford food. Political extremism rises. Civil unrest becomes normal. Then stage 9. The currency fails. The government loses control. The empire ends. This sequence is mathematically inevitable once you enter the debt spiral. Unless they stop spending, stop printing, and accept a massive recession, no empire in history has made that choice voluntarily. Now let me show you who wins and who loses. Government and politicians. They get to spend unlimited money now. They get to promise everything to everyone. They get to fund wars, programs, and bailouts. The bill comes later, after they're out of office. Asset holders. If you own stocks, real estate, gold, or Bitcoin, you win during stage 6. Money printing inflates asset prices. The S&P 500 went from 2,200 to 4,800 since 2020. That's a 118% gain. Debtors with fixed-rate loans. If you borrowed $500,000 at 3% to buy a house in 2020, you're winning. That $500,000 debt is getting easier to pay as inflation erodes its real value. Your mortgage payment stays fixed while your income rises with inflation. Banks and financial institutions. They get bailed out when they fail. Silicon Valley Bank depositors lost nothing. First Republic depositors lost nothing. The government printed money to make them whole. Banks get the upside of risky investments, and the government covers the downside. The top. They own 32% of all stocks. They own 15% of all real estate. As assets inflate, they capture the majority of gains. From 2020 to 2024, the top 1% gained $14 trillion in wealth. The bottom 50% gained $400 billion from wage earners, without assets. If your wealth is just your salary and your savings account, you're losing. Your salary might go up 3% per year, but real inflation is 8 to 12% annually. You're losing 5 to 9% of purchasing power every year. Savers. If you saved $100,000 in a bank account in 2020, that money lost 24% of its purchasing power by official numbers. By real numbers, it lost 50%. Your $100,000 now buys what $50,000 bought in 2020. Retirees on fixed income Social Security adjusts for inflation using the CPI, but the CPI understates real inflation. If you're getting $2,000 per month in Social Security, your real purchasing power dropped from $2,000 to $200 in 5 years. Renters' median rent in the U.S. went from $1,600 in 2020 to $2,200 in 2024. That's a 38% increase, but median wages only rose 12%. If you're paying rent, you lost 26% of your income to housing alone. Small businesses. Large corporations get access to cheap loans and government contracts. Small businesses don't. When inflation hits, small businesses can't raise prices fast enough to cover rising costs. Profit margins collapse. In 2023, small business bankruptcies hit 60,000, up 40% from 2022. Future generations. The $37 trillion debt doesn't disappear. Neither does the inflated currency. The next generation inherits a destroyed currency, a hollowed-out economy, and a $100 trillion debt burden. You lost 25-50% of your purchasing power in the last 5 years. Food costs 30% more. Rent costs 38% more. Your wages went up 12%. The gap is theft, silent, legal, inevitable in stage 6. Here's what you need to do now. Here's what you need to do now. Hard money means gold, silver, or Bitcoin. Assets that can't be printed by central banks. Target allocation, 10 to 15% in physical gold, 10% in silver, 5 to 10% in Bitcoin if you understand the technology. Why? Because when stage 7 hits, paper currencies collapse. Hard assets maintain purchasing power. Gold preserved wealth through every currency crisis in history. In Weimar Germany, 1 ounce of gold bought a decent house in 1920 and still bought a decent house in 1923. The mark lost 99.9%. Gold held steady. Buy physical metal, not paper certificates, not ETFs, physical coins, or bars you can hold. If you own treasury bonds, corporate bonds, or bond funds, consider reducing positions. When stage 7 hits, interest rates spike. Bond values collapse. In 2022, the aggregate bond market dropped 13%. The worst year for bonds since 1871. That was just a preview. If you need fixed income, keep duration short, under 3 years. Or shift to treasury inflation-protected securities. Tips: stocks, real estate, commodities. Assets that produce cash flow or have tangible value. Not speculative growth stocks. Dividend-paying companies with pricing power, companies that can raise prices during inflation, real estate that generates rental income, properties in stable areas where people will still need housing during economic stress, agricultural commodities, farmland, energy infrastructure, things people need regardless of the currency's value. Keep 6-12 months of expenses in cash, but don't keep it all in dollars. Diversify into 2 to 3 stable foreign currencies: Swiss francs, Norwegian krone, Singapore dollars, Currencies backed by countries with low debt to GDP ratios. Open foreign bank accounts if possible. Schwab and Fidelity offer international accounts with no foreign transaction fees. This protects against dollar-specific collapse. If the dollar drops 30%, your Swiss franc holdings gain 30%. Learn practical skills. Repair work, medical skills, farming, welding, programming, security. When currency fails, barter systems emerge. Skills become currency. A plumber gets paid in food, a doctor gets paid in shelter. This sounds extreme, but it happened in Argentina in 2001, in Zimbabwe in 2008, in Venezuela from 2016 to present. The pattern repeats. Build skills that survive collapse. Consider second residency or citizenship programs. Portugal, Panama, Malta. Countries with stable institutions and low debt. If stage 8 brings civil unrest, you want options. A place to go, a legal right to be there. This isn't running away. This is creating options. Insurance. Smart people insure against unlikely but catastrophic events. The choice is yours. Position yourself now or watch your wealth evaporate in stages 7, 8, and 9. The United States is in stage 6 of the 9-stage empire decline cycle. The debt spiral is accelerating. Currency debasement is accelerating. The timeline is compressing. Rome took 241 years from stage 6 to collapse. Britain took 66 years. The Soviet Union took 11 years. Each cycle moves faster. Each empire thinks they're different. Each empire discovers they're not. We're 4 years into stage 6. Based on historical patterns, we have between 7 and 62 years until stage 9. But the evidence suggests the lower end of that range. The currency crisis of stage 7 could hit within 3 to 5 years. Maybe sooner if there's a catalyst, a war, a banking crisis, a treasury market failure. You have time to prepare. But the window is closing. The choice is yours. You can ignore the pattern and hope this time is different. You can trust that politicians and central bankers will somehow solve a problem that has never been solved in human history. Or you can look at the evidence, recognize the pattern, and position yourself accordingly. This isn't about doom. This isn't about fear. This is about pattern recognition and rational preparation. If you want to stay ahead of this, I send detailed updates and analysis to members every week. We track the specific indicators that signal progression from stage 6 to stage 7. We update strategies as conditions change. Join at the link below. Share this video with anyone who needs to see it. The more people who understand the pattern, the better prepared we'll all be. Position yourself now, not after stage 7 hits, not after the currency crisis begins. Now, this is not financial advice. Do your own research. Verify everything I've told you, but don't wait. The pattern is clear. The timeline is accelerating. The choice is yours.